Hello and welcome. My name is Tom. This is the Enthusiasm Project Season 10, Episode 1. Wow, that's amazing. And it is the very first episode of that season, as you could tell by the number 1. So it is the season premiere. And oh boy, there's so much to talk about because for some reason, through the serendipity of the universe, every time I take a break between seasons, all kinds of new stuff happens. And so there's always plenty to talk about. Maybe if we ever need something interesting to happen, I'll just take a break from podcasting for a while and then interesting things will happen and that will be great. Today, we're going to focus a lot on gear and I am excited to do that. I do always sort of have, I never really know how to approach the beginning of a season, even though that's even sort of arbitrary. It's like, what even counts as a season? What is time? What is thought? All of these things. But I always kind of think, okay, if we're going to jump into a new batch of episodes, should this one be like diving into a meaty topic and it's kind of focused on that? Or should it be something that's, I don't know if lighter is the word, but something else, a little more timely, a little more lighter, whatever it might be. Both are good options. Today, I want to go the route of talking about gear because there's just so many things. Some good, some a little not as good, and definitely got a few stories to tell you along the way. So that's what we're going to do. Before we jump into that, which is going to cover a lot of stuff, I definitely want to share what I'm using because what I'm recording with right now is all new. Since the last time I recorded an episode, I am recording using the Podmic USB, the Rode Podmic USB, but I'm not using it in USB mode. I'm using it in XLR mode. This is maybe the, fifth time I've used this microphone, and I do really like it so far. We'll talk about it later. It's one of the things we're going to talk about. I do really like it so far. I'm using it in XLR mode, and I have the big poofy windscreen because it does come with a windscreen on it, so I have that big poofy windscreen on it. Now, it is running into the Mackie DLZ creator, not the Rodecaster. And the DLZ creator from Mackie is like it's a Rodecaster competitor. I'm sure they wouldn't like me to call it that, but it is. And, there's design cues from the Rodecaster, but this is an interesting one. It's also something we'll be talking about. Definitely kind of takes things in its own direction a little bit. And, the thing that's interesting about this, obviously it's not a Rode product, so there's no pod mic setting like there is with the Rodecaster Pro. So I'm using just a generic dynamic mic setting on this. And I do have some EQ. There's some really cool EQ stuff that you can do in here. So if I turn that off, now this is just the pod mic's dry sound. Actually, I think I can even turn off more EQ. I have the compressor and the de-esser there. So this is just the microphone as it sounds normally. And then once I go in and turn on all of the EQ, this is what it sounds like. And this is what that sounds like. Another thing that's interesting with this that I did today, which I was a little scared of because I'm kind of a control freak, is this has an auto gain feature, which is you push a button, you talk into the microphone for a while, and then it sets your level based on that. And that's what I'm doing. So that's the level I'm using right now, which I do think sounds pretty good, but I'm not as familiar with this device as I am with something like the Rodecaster. So, we're going to kind of have to wait and see. I did some test recordings. They sounded good, but it's always scary to do, I did a short test recording, but now I'm going to talk for an hour. We'll hear what that sounds like. But anyway, running into the DLZ creator, it has 80 decibels of clean gain built in, so there's no need for boosters or anything. Very similar to the Rodecaster Pro in that regard. We'll dive more into that, but that's what you're hearing. And the same thing with the intro outro music was just played through the sample pads on the DLZ creator. So that is the setup right now, and that sets me up to catch up. Let's see, I need to muster the courage to catch up on all of this new updates so you can relish the thought of this episode. And that's what we're going to jump into. So in no particular order, I sort of listed all of the things that have happened and updates. Some of these are things, actually a lot of them are things that people have asked me about or I've talked to people about. A couple of them are things that have already made their way into videos. Some of them will make their way into future videos and some of them won't. So this is just sort of my thoughts and my input on all this, which as always is not the be all end all definitive thing. It's just my thoughts and my perspective. So if you want to share anything, of course, you can always reach out. Here's the first reminder of the season. You can always send an email to tom@enthusiasmproject.com, or you can go to hi-my-name-is-tom.com. Just scroll down a little bit and you'll see the SpeakPipe link where you can just click record, and whatever microphone on whatever device you're using, you can record a message for future episodes. So if you have thoughts or questions or whatever, we do not have to wait till a Q&A episode. You can do that anytime. So, and I have a feeling people might have some thoughts after some of the stuff I talk about today. But the first thing I want to talk about, the first big update, which I'm really happy about this one for a couple of reasons, even though it's not something I actually plan to use that much, is Final Cut Pro on the iPad. This is something that is it was very big news when it came out. Apple announced that Final Cut Pro is available on iPads with the M1 processor. So if you have an older iPad, that even if it's like still great, because iPads have been overpowered for iPad OS for years now. But if it's not an M1 or an M series iPad, it won't run Final Cut Pro. So you need some kind of M series iPad to do that. If you do, though, it is $5 a month or $50 a year. So it's the first time Final Cut Pro has done anything subscription related, which I'm actually totally fine with. $50 a year for a pretty dang full-featured editing program, especially their first mobile version. It's not perfect, but it is really good. Like, it is way more full-featured than Final Cut Pro on desktop was when it was revamped to Final Cut Pro 10, like 10 years ago. So definitely worth the $5 a month or $50 a year if you're planning to use it. Okay. I think it's great. I don't see myself editing a lot of video on my iPad because I have a MacBook and a Mac Mini, and the display, the external display that's really big and nice, and I don't really want to use the iPad for that when I have the full power of the desktop version. But the iPad version is really good and it works incredibly well, and there's really neat stuff in there. Like, they take really good advantage of the Apple Pencil, which is one of my favorite accessories. It makes it so easy to like draw on stuff and do titles, and it just works incredibly well. And so I'm very hopeful that some of those features, I don't know how the Apple Pencil would, but some of those features will make their way into the desktop version of Final Cut Pro as well. It's definitely a great option for someone who has, if you have any of the M series Macs, Final Cut Pro will probably work really well. But if you don't have something like that, or you have an older computer but you have an iPad, it's a really good way to jump into the world of video editing. But from a bigger perspective, the reason I'm really excited about Final Cut Pro on iPad, as someone who recently released a Final Cut Pro editing course, is that it shows Apple has not given up on Final Cut Pro. So that has been kind of my fear, especially with the rise of DaVinci Resolve, which I have so many notes. I may or may not do an entire episode all about DaVinci Resolve, because I've also been trying to learn that just for funsies, and it's great. And I think Blackmagic is doing so many things right with Resolve, but I definitely am still a Final Cut Pro person. I'm pro Final Cut Pro, but I've been a little scared lately because Apple kind of just sort of like letting it hang, and I don't know what they're going to do with it. But obviously it's not dead if they're developing it for iPad and doing a couple little updates to make it compatible so you can transfer projects between iPad and desktop to an extent. That makes me very happy to know that Final Cut Pro is not dead and may be in for some sort of revamp from Apple. We'll have to wait and see on that. Maybe you even know the answer. If you're listening to this in the future, you might already know the answer to this question. But that makes me incredibly happy. It was concerning when you would go to the iPad sales page on Apple's website. DaVinci Resolve on iPad was in the graphics, in the marketing materials was Resolve. It was not Final Cut Pro or iMovie or anything. And it's okay, if you guys are just advertising some other company's thing as the main editing software, it really makes me feel like you're not putting a lot of thought into your own anymore. And I'm happy to know that that's not the case. And as soon as Final Cut on iPad came out, you can bet they changed those sales page images to be Final Cut Pro on iPad and no mention of Resolve at all anymore. But I think that's a great thing. And that makes me really happy. And I'm excited for that. So I think it's a good thing for people who want mobile editing. I think it's an awesome tool to maybe incorporate into your Final Cut workflow. And I think it's good news for people who are Final Cut Pro editors, because it shows that the application we love and use so much isn't just dead. I have been trying to debate on what to do about my Final Cut Pro course with iPad. because initially my thought is, and I actually still don't know. So initially my thought is, well, I need to add some updates about Final Cut Pro on iPad, but what I want to do is wait a little bit because it's still the first version and there's going to be some updates and things. So I want to wait till it's sort of a little more established and there's a workflow there before I try to like explain how to use it to anybody so things don't just change immediately. But also the workflows are so different that a big part of me, this isn't even like a money grab thing, a big part of me feels like that should be its own separate course. To be honest, I don't know if I want to make that course or not. Maybe that's something for somebody else to make, but so I'm not sure. So for now, my Final Cut Pro course is desktop editing, not mobile editing. But either way, Final Cut Pro on iPad is super exciting. Now, the next thing to move on to, that's really the only software related thing that came out, but that's a big one. Sony, as is tradition, has smashed and combined existing parts into multiple new cameras because that is what they do. They have a big bin of parts and they take them all and like throw them against a wall, and whatever sticks, that is the new camera model. And they're all great. Like they're all great. There is no bad camera, but it's crazy. Like every month Sony comes out with a new camera, but it's not really anything new. It's just sort of different versions of things. But they're cool. So I figured it's worth mentioning some of them. At the time I'm recording this, the most recent of those is the ZV-1 II, the ZV-1 Mark II. Also just not good at naming cameras, which is essentially just the ZV-1 with a wider lens. Some other little things here or there, but that's really what it is. And that makes sense because the ZV-1 is really geared as like this, vlogging, portable, on-the-go type camera. But the lens that it came with, I forget what the focal length, I think it's a 24 millimeter on a small sensor. It's just too close. It's like it's too tight to use like that, to hold out and film yourself. It's really, really hard. Heather has a ZV-1 that she's had for a couple of years now, and she has one of the wide, I think it's the Lonzi wide angle adapter on it to make it wide, and that works great. And then the camera's like amazing. And essentially they've just taken that and built it right into the lens. The downside is, though, the lens now doesn't go as far. So in a weird way, I'm only having this thought right now, the lens doesn't zoom in as far anymore. It's almost like the original ZV-1 with the wide angle adapter is better, or is it better because you zoom in, but the wide angle adapter, I don't know. It's a cool update. It's definitely not a like throw away your ZV-1 and go get the ZV-1 II because it's not that big of a difference, but it's a nice refresh to a camera that's a couple years old. They've seen how people are using it. They've listened to some of the complaints about it, and they've addressed some of that. That's pretty cool. Prior to that, gosh, let's see. It was the ZV-E1. That's the other one. That's really the big one, and the confusing one to me. So the ZV-E1, I know it's kind of old news now, but I have not talked about it yet, is Sony's full frame. It's like their full frame vlogging camera. They're really into calling everything a vlogging camera, which is, sort of interesting. Like that's cool, but I don't know. It's interesting. And the ZV-E1 is great. It's that same like amazing sensor. I believe it's the same sensor from like the A7S III, the FX3, which is also the same sensor from the FX6, which is a $6,000 plus camera. So you can get that same image quality and that same sensor in this much smaller form factor, and I think that's what they were really going for, is ultra compact. Not that the mirrorless cameras are big, but this is even smaller, yet it's still a full frame camera. That is super cool. And it has some of those like those AI modes where it's almost like it can kind of crop in a little bit and then follow you around the frame. So even if you have your camera sitting on a tripod and you're in front of it, it sort of looks like someone's kind of behind the camera moving, adding in some camera movement. I've actually been surprised. I haven't used it myself, but in the examples I've seen, I've actually been pretty surprised by it. It looks good. Like it really kind of looks like someone's moving the camera around, which, I guess there's a whole discussion about motivated and unmotivated camera movement, but I think it's a really cool tool to have. Having used the Insta360 Link webcam, which is their it's a little tiny webcam that will follow you around. I really like it. It's super cool to know that if I move over a little bit or move something, I'm still going to be framed in the shot nicely and it's going to follow me. So having a version of that functionality on a full frame mirrorless camera, with an amazing lens and crazy good image quality, that's pretty cool. And I think that's I think that's awesome. Probably not a reason to buy the camera, but I think it's very, very cool. Obviously, as has been the case, stabilization continues to improve. So it's a great camera. My only qualm with it is the price. It is insanely expensive at like over $2,000 for this camera, because you could literally spend $200 more and get the A7 IV, which is a full frame camera, different sensor, but a full frame camera that is, I don't want to say better. The E1 is probably better for video because the sensor it has is geared more towards video. But it's in this smaller body, so it still kind of does have like potential to have overheating issues, whereas the A7 IV is in a bigger physical body. Sometimes I think that's sort of a benefit. It's better at photos because it has a higher resolution. It's kind of like, if the E1 is supposed to be the all-around, like take everywhere with you vlog camera, I kind of almost think the A7 IV is better suited for that because it excels at photos and videos. And it, even though supposedly it has overheating issues, I say supposedly because I know that it can. I live in the desert. I've had mine for a year and a half. I've not had any issues with it, but it is possible. They are not as bad as what the E1 is because of the physical size and heat dissipation of that camera. So I guess like that's kind of my thing with the E1. I think it's wonderful. I just think it's too expensive. So I would never buy it. I would never buy a kind of plasticky camera with no viewfinder for over $2,000. But the image quality is great. The functionality is great. It's got some awesome new features. If they had made it like $1,500, it would be the no-brainer. The same way that the E10, so there's the ZV-1, the ZV-E10, the ZV-E1, I'm sure there's even more. The ZV-E10, their small, most entry-level APS-C crop sensor camera, has been like such a great recommendation. It's, it's like $800 with a lens. It shoots 4K video, amazing image quality, good at photos. It's like the perfect, it's a perfect secondary camera for almost anybody, but especially for someone who's looking to get like their first good camera, it's kind of the perfect entry-level one. And then Sony has all the other, of course they have the A7 IV and the FX3 and the FX30 and the, you can go up and up. And those are their full frame, more expensive cameras, with the A7 IV being $2,400. So if it had been possible for them to put the ZV-E1, a full frame camera, at like $1,500, $1,600, it would have been, I think, the perfect like stepping stone. Then they would really dominate everything. But now you're putting it in like over $2,000. Then people are going to look at Canon and Panasonic and Sony and, all of these other, or Sony. Yeah, people are going to look at Sony. People are going to look at other cameras from other manufacturers and other options to see what they have rather than just kind of jumping into the system. So I don't know, I don't know how the economics of scale work to make things affordable or not affordable, but I think the E1's a great camera. I think it's way overpriced, and because of that, I would never consider it myself. Although I have friends, I know people who have it, and they love it because it fits into what they need. And the image quality, of course, is absolutely outstanding. But of course, not to be outdone, Canon wanted to release a new camera. They released a couple new cameras. They're really expanding their mirrorless lineup and their R lineup, and they've gone into, in the past year, they've really gone into a lot of crop sensor mirrorless cameras, which is awesome and opens up a ton of flexibility and functionality to people who are in the Canon ecosystem. But Canon did something really confusing. I know that's shocking. Canon do something confusing? They did something very confusing recently, which was they released what would essentially have been like an entry-level Rebel camera, but it's an R series crop sensor mirrorless camera. And that's cool. Like, I think that's cool. It wasn't that long ago that Canon's only mirrorless options were really expensive. Stuff like the R5, R6. So, the entry-level price is $2,500. I guess the original R, I should say, which was $1,800, but it's not 4K really or anything. So you get into 4K mirrorless, you were spending $2,600 to $3,800 just to get your foot in the door. And they've been expanding that lineup with more affordable options, some of which are pretty fantastic. To capture that lower end market, they released the EOS R100. And it's $480 for the camera, which is, you get a mirrorless Canon 4K camera for under $500. This is the camera I don't think anybody should buy. If you haven't, you love it, I apologize, but I don't think anybody should buy this camera. This is where it's like the ZV-E10 makes sense. It is more expensive. It's $800, not 500, but you get a usable camera. The thing about this is so incredibly crippled. Like, I don't even know why can't, like having an inexpensive Rebel level R series camera is, I think, a really good idea. Making that affordable so people jump into your ecosystem early is great. But it's already a crop sensor camera, and then the 4K movie mode is cropped even more on that. But the thing to me, well, there's a lot. There's no articulating screen. It's essentially got the screen from the T2i back in 2010 or my XTI in 2007. Well, that's not that bad, but like a lot of people have said this is just sort of like a rebadged M50 with a different lens mount on it. And that would actually be cool because the M50 is a great camera and a very practical camera to use. But they have even like taken functionality away from it. There are like virtually no buttons or dials on this. Like the bare minimum to operate a camera is what you get. And they're tiny and small. And then you do not have an articulating screen. I do not understand how in 2023, any company, like the only cameras that don't have articulating screens that I can kind of understand is something like a Red Komodo or an Arri Alexa, where they're not really supposed to because the person who's using it is going to attach some kind of recorder or monitor to it anyway, and they don't need to rely on the camera for that. For the camera that's the $500 Canon camera that people are going to get because they're just like, oh, I want a camera, I'm going to grab that. This is just a world of frustration. This is why I don't recommend, even though it is cheaper, why I don't recommend these cameras, because you're going to get it. It's not going to have the functionality you need. It's not going to have the ease of use that you need. It's not going to have the quality of life features. It's going to be a struggle to work with, which is going to demotivate you from wanting to use it. And then you're not going to use it, not going to make stuff you want with it, feel like you've wasted money because you kind of have. Whereas then you could get something like the ZV-E 10 and actually like grow with the camera and make really cool stuff with it. So that's Canon's option. It's a weird one. I don't really understand that one. And I just, the thing that would be hilarious, as I'm looking at this right now, I'm realizing its IO is incredibly limited. It only has, it has micro HDMI. It would be hilarious if of all cameras that this had full-size HDMI, which kind of, in the world of Canon, wouldn't surprise me that much. Let's see. Oh, and then other camera things. So that's kind of the last release, but as someone who has used Sony cameras for the past few years, I did actually have someone from Sony reach out to me recently, and that was pretty cool. It was after ironically, it was after I did a podcast episode sort of criticizing them, but it wasn't related because the email they sent was sent before the episode. I just didn't get to it till after. So it felt weird timing because I made a podcast episode where I was a bit critical of some of the things Sony does and how they market things. And then like the very next week, it was like, hey, Tom, like we'd love to touch base with you. And I was like, oh, okay. But it was pure coincidence. But anyway, so I've had 2 experiences with Sony so far. And I like sharing these because I think that the world of like, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this right now, but I think that the world of, I guess we call it influencer marketing, is a bit strange. And there's definitely kind of a veil that's put over things from what's happening behind the scenes to what's happening in front. And I personally try to not have that veil be there. I try to unveil everything. Is that where the term unveil comes from? Wow, maybe. I try to make sure everything is like clear and transparent as possible. And so my first interaction with Sony was about a year ago. I got a message from them saying, hey, we see you're using Sony cameras. We'd love to like touch base with you, blah, 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 which, I've bought all my Sony cameras at full price with my own money. There's been nothing weird happening there. It's just a bunch of money that I spend on stuff. And I thought that was cool. Great. Yeah, I do a lot of stuff with Sony cameras. It'd be cool to have a contact, not even like to get free gear, but to have someone that I can ask questions to instead of me having to investigate or kind of like figure things out. If I'm having an issue or, a comment pops up repeatedly on a video and I don't know the answer to it, being able to just reach out to the company that makes the thing and ask them the question and get an answer is a really valuable thing. And so we're talking, they're like, oh, we'd love to help you, or we'd love to have you help us on some project. I don't even know what it was, because the thing that I did was I said, yeah, sure, this is awesome and exciting. Here's a page on my website. This is my ethics statement for how I handle all brand partnerships. And then I never heard from them again, which, I thought sort of said a lot about them. And then a totally different person reached out a couple months ago who I'm guessing is starting over from scratch. Like, I don't think they knew about this previous introduction, but they were much more on board with everything. So I don't know what changed there. They were super cool. And I really loved their approach, because their thing was, we'd love to just essentially open up a line of communication, which is what I wanted. I want to be able to ask those questions, get answers to things, figure stuff out. That's helpful for me, and that's helpful for an audience, as someone who makes videos about this stuff for an audience. That's really cool. And then they did say, every once in a while, we'd like to send you gear, but there is no obligation to do anything with it. And they kind of had this really cool, I was really happy with the philosophy where they were sort of talking about, this is just the one person, I don't know that it represents Sony's view as a company, but this person was explaining that, influencer marketing seems to be going in a direction that is not only uninteresting, but also ineffective and not really beneficial to anyone. And essentially what they said was, every once in a while, if there's something interesting, we'd love to send it to you so you can just give us feedback on it. That's what they want. And that's what I want to give. I want to be able to say, if Canon sent me the R100, I'd be like, why are you making a camera that does not have an articulating screen in 2023? That is crazy. Don't do that. Maybe they would be able to make a better camera after that, or at least give me a reason why they're not. And so that's awesome. Being able to give that feedback is really cool. And of course, they're upfront, like, if you want to make videos about it, we're not going to argue, but there's no obligation to do that, which is always really nice. And so they did send me, the very first thing they sent me was the ZV-1F, because there's another ZV-1 thing. This is not a new, it's like 5 months old. It's sort of like another version of the ZV-1, but it has a fixed lens, a fixed wide lens, and a little bit of a digital zoom. So the lens doesn't zoom in at all. And I've been playing around with it a bit. It doesn't have the advanced AI stuff that the ZV-2 has or the E1 has. It's basically the original ZV-1 with a different lens, but I actually really like it. I was kind of thinking having this fixed pancake lens would be limiting, but the digital zoom works really good because it doesn't lose any quality. It doesn't go very far, but it doesn't lose any quality. But the biggest benefit is anytime you've used any of the point and shoot cameras pretty much ever from any brand, when you turn them on, you have to wait a second for the lens to open up and pop out and go to the focal length it needs. And that is not a big deal, but it takes 2 or 3 seconds. This camera is instant on because the lens doesn't move at all. And it's crazy how helpful that has been to just be able to and it has a power button, but opening and closing the screen is also the power button. So it's literally just open the screen, camera's on, ready to go, close the screen, camera's off. Really fun, super fun. So I've been using that on some videos I've been working on for my second channel. To see how I like it, because it's really, really, really fun to use. But I kind of need to dig into what's the actual image quality like? Is this actually better or easier than just using my phone? Because I don't like really filming with phones. I don't like the ergonomics of phones, but I always have my phone with me, and the camera's pretty decent. So what is the motivation to bring an entirely separate piece of equipment for those situations where it is things that are very casual? And maybe a phone is more than enough. Because if I'm doing something, big or specific, then I would bring one of my bigger cameras. So, is there room for a point and shoot camera anymore? I guess is the question there. But anyway, that's kind of my update on cameras. Now we're going to jump into, I know we're 30 minutes in, but now we're going to jump into some of the meaty stuff. And we're going to talk about audio gear from Rode and other companies. And I want to start off by talking about what I'm calling, which may be slightly insulting, but I'm calling Rodecaster clones, because that is, they're things that wouldn't exist without the Rodecaster, even if they have their own identity in one way or another. And every single one of these takes design cues from the Rodecaster, including the Mackie DLZ that I'm using right now. Even though it looks different, if you've ever seen this thing, it's way bigger than the Rodecaster. The standout feature is the display. It's like a 9 or a 10-inch display. It's huge. It's I literally think it's bigger than an iPad mini, the display that's on here. So it's, that's different. And that means having that display, the way that you interact with it is very different. And obviously when you're talking about audio mixers, there's a certain form factor that they just sort of have to have. Like, it's just the form factor that works. Like, every car that has 4 wheels is not copying some other car. Like, that's just sort of the form factor that works. But when you have sort of this all black thing, and you have colored sound pads, and you have, in this case, the thing with the DLZ that stands out are the headphone knobs. They have little RGB rings around that. It looks exactly like the Rodecaster. And I posted a picture of this when I got it, like, hey, look, I'm checking this out. And so many people thought it was a new Rodecaster. So it looks enough that that's what people are going to think. It's like a bigger and more advanced Rodecaster. And then the other one that I've been using and working with is the Boss Gigcaster, which right there in the name, you can tell, yeah. And then the design, it kind of looks like a reconfigured Rodecaster. It's taller and more narrow. But you can't look at any of these without thinking of the Rodecaster, and I think that sucks. Not because, I mean, it's a good design, it looks nice, but especially in the case of the DLZ, I do think this is enough of its own thing where it's not even necessarily a competitor to the Rodecaster, but by looking kind of like the Rodecaster, it will always have that baggage of people comparing it to it. And that's just kind of unfortunate. That's probably my biggest critique of it. So let's see. Let's start with the DLZ. Because I've gotten the most questions about this. That, again, is what I'm using right now to record this into. It's awesome. It is the most expensive option. It's $800, which is sort of interesting because Mackie has been making mixers for a really long time. So they're not new to making mixers, but they haven't made one of these, the new media all-in-one recorder interface podcasting streaming thing. They haven't done that yet. So this is their first one of those. And it's interesting because Mackie is also typically kind of one of the more affordable companies, budget-friendly companies out there. But with this, they specifically wanted to go for a more premium market. So they did make something that is bigger and in many ways more powerful than the Rodecaster, and more expensive than the Rodecaster. And that is all by design. They're not trying to price cut or undercut it. They're creating something different. And I really like that because they have created something different. And it's sort of an interesting one because it's a version 1.0 device, but it's the most polished one that I've come across. I've used other ones like the Zoom P8 and the Tascam Mixcast 4, which were competitors really more for the original Rodecaster. The Zoom, in terms of audio quality, they're all fantastic. So if you have any of these and you love them, I'm not at all trying to criticize your gear. The Zoom, I did not like at all. I didn't like the build quality or the interface or the usability. It's been out for a couple years now and has like really no updates or anything. So whatever like quirks and weirdness it had, you should never buy something thinking that it will get better with an update. But it's nice with this kind of stuff as it evolves so fast to know like, oh, there's this weird thing with the interface, or there's this annoying thing here. I wish it could do that can be updated via firmware. And Rode with the Rodecaster has kind of set the standard for that as being something that happens with these mixers. Zoom is terrible at that. The other companies are significantly better. The Tascam Mixcast 4, I think, was the only real competitor to the original Rodecaster because it's great. It's just sort of like a different flavor of the same thing, and it works better for some people. Some people like the Rodecaster more. Some people like the Mixcast more. I really liked it, but I also like the original Rodecaster. So that thing's great. The Rodecaster 2 sort of blows all of them out of the water. Like, there's no reason to even look at those because the Rodecaster, they don't compare at all. Like, it is that much better. And so now there's a new generation of devices coming out that are more competing with the Rodecaster 2. So like, I would never compare the Mixcast and the Rodecaster 2 because it almost doesn't even make sense. But comparing the DLZ, comparing the Boss Gigcasters does make a bit more sense. And the DLZ, there is a lot. I don't know. I guess I need to make a video about this, but I don't know if it's going to be its own video or if it's going to be kind of a condensed, like, let's look at a couple of these separate clones together. The DLZ, the thing that's the most interesting about it to me is that it really does seem to be geared more towards audio professionals. Like, one of the complaints I've seen from people with the Rodecaster is people come into it who have like audio engineering, audio production backgrounds. They've been doing it for their job or their career for a while, and they really want the Rodecasters to sort of live up to some of the standards and some of the workflows that they are used to from that. And I think Rode has done a good job in updating and adding in, is a really advanced, fully featured thing at this point. But I still know that crowd is still like, they still feel like things are missing. Whereas Mackie, I feel like is, if you're an audio person who has a background in audio and you want to get one of these all-in-one mixers, this seems like something you're going to feel much more at home with and much more comfortable with and impressed by. And that's cool. Like, that's why I don't really think they're direct competitors, because I think there's an overlap a little bit in customers, but in the Venn diagram of like who the DLZ is for, who the Rodecaster is for, I really feel like it is two separate audiences with just a little bit of overlap. And I think that's great. Like, I like the distinction between them, which is why anything about the DLZ that makes it look like the Rodecaster bums me out, because I want it to look like its own thing. However, the feedback, like the reception it's gotten so far from other reviewers and other customers and stuff, has been really positive. Like, seems like they kind of hit the nail on the head with what people were looking for and what people wanted with this. So it is incredibly advanced. My impulse is to say it is not for like the casual user. And I think that there are a lot of people who might buy a DLZ because it's like the biggest and the best and the most expensive, and it's going to be way more than they need. Like, not even just the idea of like, oh, why are you using this, cinema camera for YouTube? Like, not like equipment overkill stuff, which I don't really think exists, but I mean literally, like, it is kind of confusing to use in a lot of ways because it relies on those professional traditional workflows, which are not sometimes intuitive at all. If you playing back a file, for example, on the Rodecaster, you go into your SD card and you find your recording and you tap on it and then it plays. On the DLZ, you do that, but then you have to route it through like an output channel. It's not, you can't just click on the thing and have it play the way you would expect as a consumer or a more casual user. As somebody who comes in with a background in audio stuff, routing stuff, and it's going to make a lot more sense to you. So I think it is genuinely overkill for a lot of people because it will be frustrating to use. And it is also a 1.0 device. So even though the interface and the software is like quite good and quite polished, there are still things where it's just like, why are you doing it this way? Why do I have to tap 3 times to do this, or whatever? Kind of weird stuff like that. But it is really advanced. It works really well. It has such good EQ, and they do such a good job of taking advantage of this huge screen, because you can just put like a graphic equalizer on screen, and then with your fingers you can move points around to EQ stuff. So awesome. Tons of effects, plenty of built-in gain. But there are also other things like limited USB output connections. Like the Rodecaster is easy to connect to multiple devices, multiple computers. Not this. This is a one device thing. That's kind of weird to me, a little bit there. And this is sort of a weird complaint, but a lot of people hate the power button on the Rodecaster Pro. It's sort of like this spongy, weird button, and you sort of like push it and it's kind of hard to press. And then you either have to push it a second time or confirm that you're shutting things off on the screen. And people hate that button. I don't hate it, because the reason that power button is squishy and weird is so you cannot accidentally turn off the Rodecaster. Because even if you push the button, it gives you a confirmation. Whereas the DLZ has a traditional rocker switch, which is way easier and more comfortable to use. But I 100% did accidentally shut it off during a test recording today before recording this, because I was just reaching back trying to adjust something, and I bumped the power switch and shut the whole thing down. So that has never happened with the Rode thing, and it happens with this. So it's like, it is more pro in a lot of ways, but at the same time, there are these weird little things where it's like way less pro, and that's confusing. There's only a few of those, but it's definitely a thing. It does have an easy, like, medium and pro mode, which is cool. So if you are somebody who you don't have that background, but you want to use this, you can go into easy mode, and then it sort of takes care of everything for you, and it does it really, really well. And then you can sort of like enable the intermediate mode or enable the advanced mode as time goes on and you learn more. It does a really good job also of explaining things to you. Like, it has a built-in tour, like demo mode, where it will explain stuff to you. And I really need to give credit to Mackie for their documentation. their very long and in-depth owner's manual, which is almost 100 pages long, is amazing. Like, I'm very used to essentially everything now having virtually no documentation. It's really bad. Rode has good documentation, but it's also like a little... The thing with Rode is I feel like they're always trying to project an image, and whatever that image is, of something being cool or awesome or whatever. And it's like, sometimes I feel like even in the documentation, I can't escape the marketing, and I just kind of want the answers. Mackie, as advanced as this mixer is, their documentation covers everything very in depth, but does so in incredibly down to earth, everyday language. And it's like, there's even like jokes in it, like little like sarcastic asides and things. It really feels like it's what somebody would say if they were sitting down with you and teaching you how to use this. It's like, that's how the instructions are written. And that's awesome. Like, that is such a rare thing to find now. So they've just done such a good job. And this thing clearly, like, I think this has quite a future, both just making a name for itself and then potentially, I guess, starting a new line of mixer interfaces and things. So the Mackie DLZ Creator, totally awesome. Definitely, I think, geared towards a more pro audience than a lot of the Rode gear is. And I think that's good. I think that's an audience that has not been fully served by these products yet. And now they have something that they're going to feel right at home with. If you're somebody who wants to learn more and like really kind of dig into being more of an audio pro or an advanced amateur, this is probably a great thing to learn on. If you're somebody who doesn't know a lot of that stuff and doesn't really want to learn, you just want something that's like easy to use and whatever, this probably is not the thing for you. It's also massive, like, and it has to sit on your desk. There's no like VESA mount or anything on it. So it's huge. It takes up a lot of space. And, for a lot of people with their home office, home studio setup, that's just going to be awful. But there's definitely a group of people for whom this is like perfect and awesome. And hopefully we'll only continue to get better through updates and all that stuff over time. So that's the DLZ Creator. Pretty cool. The next one is the Boss Gigcaster. This is one that I am like, there's two of these. There's the Gigcaster 4 and 8. And as you would expect, the 4 has 4 channels. The 8 has 8 channels. I have the Gigcaster 8, which is essentially the competitor to the Rodecaster Pro 2 because they have the same number of inputs, outputs. They look really similar. Like, the joke that has popped up is the Boss Gigcaster looks like, if you've seen the meme of like, Mom, can we get Rodecaster Pro 2? We have Rodecaster Pro 2 at home. Rodecaster Pro 2 at home is this. Like, it's kind of like, it does sort of look like that. And I was really excited for this because as someone who has played guitar and instruments for many years, I've had Boss pedals, I've had Roland gear. Boss and Roland are the same company, or Boss is owned by Roland. And I was like, wow, like, you guys are releasing something to this market and you have all of this experience. I would love a Rodecaster type device that's built like a Boss guitar pedal. And I got it and I was really disappointed. Like, to the point where I had to sort of send them an email and go, I don't know. I don't even know where to go with this or how to approach it. And then it's sort of weird because the person who had reached out to me about like, oh, I want to send you this or whatever, they ended up leaving. Like, they were like, oh, I got a new position, everything's cool. I'm excited about that, which is great for them. But then I'm just here like, now, I don't know. Yeah, I just have this thing and like, I don't know what I'm doing with it. So functionally it works great. Like, it's essentially the same as the Rodecaster Pro 2. You've got the same inputs, you've got tons of clean gain. I love that on all these devices you don't need new mixer, you don't need boosters or anything. Like, they all can just handle whatever mic you put into them, even something like an SM7B. The thing with the Gigcaster, it is a little more compact than the Rodecaster, and that's a nice thing, but it doesn't have a VESA mount or anything, so it does have to go on your desk. It's built more plasticky than I was expecting it. I mean, the build quality is probably on par with the Rodecaster, I think a little bit less, but it's not bad. I was just expecting like Boss guitar level pedal excellence, and the interface is really bad. Like, using the screen, the screen is super low resolution. The interface, the way things look, the way they work is bad. Like it is something from 2007. It's not great. And so that's just kind of like, I'm like, all right, fine, whatever. But there's one area where it absolutely destroys everything else, and it's not even close. And that has to do with music. And specifically, if you want to connect a guitar or a bass, because it is Boss and Roland. They have been creating virtual amp and virtual, instrument modeling for decades at this point. Like since the dawn of digital instruments and digital processing, they have been there. And this has all of that inside of it. So what that means is you can connect your guitar to it. There are 100 presets already in there. There are 100 user presets that you can create, and you can mix and match and adapt and modify and add every effect you can think of. You can tweak every parameter the same way you would expect on any of their previous like music related things. None of the other devices can do anything close to this. Even like the Rodecaster and stuff, like stuff where you can connect a 1/4-inch input for an instrument. Like I've spent so many hours playing my bass through the Rodecaster Pro 2 because it's how I do like online bass lessons or just playing along with music. But it's not really that fun because you just get sort of this very basic, clean signal, and that's kind of it. Like you can run it through other software to process it, but then you introduce latency, and that's never fun because you're trying to play music where timing is kind of important. And so, if there's any kind of latency, it sort of sucks. And Rode, while they did initially released the Rodecaster as something for podcasters, streamers, and musicians, they have so far in the year that it's been out done nothing for the music side of it. Like it has not been, they've done nothing. There's been no updates as far as that goes. And that's been frustrating because that was something I was kind of really excited about with the Rodecaster, and the Boss Gigcaster sort of fills in that blank. So it's okay at the other side. It's fine. I'll use it, in a future podcast episode so you can hear the quality. It's fine. You can plug mics in, you can record at good quality. It's not going to sound bad. It's not that fun to use for that. But for music, as soon as you plug something in, it is amazing. Like, it's not even just that it sounds better than like the Rode. It sounds so good. Like, I would rather play through that than through my amps because it's so good. And then you can just take those signals and record directly into your software. You could do, obviously you could use it for live streaming or video recording, or if you're somebody who does online music lessons or something. If you have a music-centric workflow that involves like a guitar or a bass 1/4-inch instrument that needs to be plugged in, it's honestly worth the sacrificing the other niceties of like the Rodecaster or the DLZ to get the full music functionality. It's so good. And I've only discovered that as it's sort of been sitting there, and I've been like, I kind of want to play my bass for a while, but the Rodecaster doesn't sound good when you plug an instrument into it. Let me just use this, and like really discovering, oh man, this is so good. My fear though has been, can't Rode, for example, finally release a firmware update that essentially addresses those issues and adds virtual amp modeling and presets and things to it? And then if that's the case, the Gigcaster has no advantage at all. And it's the same price as the Rodecaster. That's what killed me. If it were $500, even with its deficiencies, I'd be like, this is such a good alternative. But for the same price, terrible interface, kind of lesser build quality, fewer features. What? Like, how are you making this the same price? Like, the DLZ Creator is more expensive, but you look at it and use it and you're like, yeah, okay. If you spend the $800 on the DLZ and you get it, you're going to feel like you got your money's worth. The Gigcaster, if you spent $700 on that and you got it, I think you're going to kind of be disappointed at first, unless you need it for the music stuff specifically. And now my thought, which I don't know how true this is, but my thought is, I don't know if Rode can release that update. The Rodecaster is more than capable of handling it, but like I said, Boss and Roland have been doing virtual amp modeling and stuff for decades, and I think that there are like licensing issues at play. Because when you go through those, it's like some of them are really specific. They have things that sound like certain bands or certain artists or styles, and I'm sure that those are the same presets that have existed in other interfaces and other things that they've created over the years. Now they're just finding their way in here. And I don't, that's not something I think Rode can just take and put in their own stuff. They'd have to buy it or license it from another company or build it from the ground up. And I imagine that just getting like a good clean guitar preset from the ground up would be a hard thing to put together, and then a good distorted guitar and then to do that for 100 presets, and then including like how to mix these together and let people say, I almost think Rode might have bitten off more than they can chew with that music promise. And I don't know if they have the resources to actually release that update. If they do, it would destroy the Gigcaster. Like, there would be no reason for it. But I sort of feel like if they could do it, it's already been a year. Wouldn't they have done it already? And I feel like it might come down to either the challenge that comes with developing those things, or just the cost legal side of trying to license it, or like you have to like buy a company that already has presets that you can then incorporate into your product. So I kind of feel like the Gigcaster might be safe, and therefore, if you're somebody who really wants to rely on the music side of things, it might be worth looking into. The Gigcaster 4 is cheaper. I think that's $500, I think. And that's probably honestly the way to go, because then you get, you still get all the music side of things, but you're not going to feel like you're lacking on the other audio side of things. So anyway, that's been my experience with that. I haven't really known how to approach it, but it is so great to use for music. Like it's unbelievable. Moving on then to the last sort of chunk of things to talk about, which is all of the new Rode gear. And I'll be as brief as I can with this. A couple weeks back, I made a video before I had any of this gear that sort of addressed some of my thoughts about it. And normally I don't like making videos about stuff before I have it. I'll talk about it on a podcast because we're sort of just hanging out and discussing things. But this was, they announced a lot of stuff. The biggest ones being the Rodecaster Duo, the Podmic USB that I'm using right now, and the Rode Streamer X, like their first video interface for streaming. And those all seemed pretty cool. I was getting so many questions about them, and I just kept saying, well, can't wait to get my hands on it. I'll try it. Whether Rode sends them or I buy them on my own, like whatever, definitely want to try all these things out. But I kept getting questions so much that I decided, okay, I'm going to make a video and just sort of share my thoughts on these. And in that video, I sort of explained my thoughts on them, which at the time was basically like, these all sound great. And my fear is that over the past year, Rode has sort of set themselves up, like I just mentioned, kind of over-promising. Like they make these really big promises about their products, and they market them with a lot of hype, and they set expectations very high, and then people, it can never meet those expectations. And these are three big products with three big bits of marketing hype behind them. Can Rode meet those expectations? That was kind of my fear. And I that's kind of what I talked about in the video, essentially. And then Rode even reached out to me after that and tried to, sort of explain some of the difficulties and the challenges they've had with like the Rodecaster launch and all that, which essentially came down to like, they had an idea of what they wanted products to be. The users had their idea. They had to shift gears to adjust things for the users and kind of suit their needs there. And that makes sense to me. But it's also like, let's talk about the Sennheiser profile. It's the USB microphone that Sennheiser released earlier this year. I did some videos on it. It's a great microphone. It was really Sennheiser's first USB microphone, and Sennheiser downplayed the heck out of that thing. They essentially marketed it as like, hey, here's a really good USB microphone. If you want it, you should check it out, maybe. That's kind of it. And it kind of worked for them because the microphone's really good. And so as I was using it and other people are using it, it's like it's gotten near universal praise from what I have seen, because it's like they kind of like under-promised and over-delivered, and seemed like that worked out really well. And Rode seems to kind of be doing the opposite of like over-promising and under-delivering. And Rode is just so tied up in marketing stuff, as like there has to have been a shift. And this is just me speculating, but there has to have been a shift in the past year or so in how they handle marketing, because there's so much hype in everything. And I think that is hurting them a lot, because it's setting expectations to a weird way. And then it's so confusing, because another thing they came out with, which I'm using right now, are XLR cables. You can now buy Rode designed XLR cables with Neutrik connectors in different lengths, in like amazing colors. Also, like the perfect shade of every color. And these cables are phenomenal. They're not even that expensive. They're like less expensive than you would normally expect to spend on a high-end XLR cable. They work phenomenally well. They look awesome. They're super versatile. It's like one of the coolest things ever. They have like not even talked about these being out. They just sort of are available. Like you go to B&H or Sweetwater or whatever right now and order them, or go to Rode's website and order them. They've like not mentioned them, and they're amazing. Versus like other stuff where they're kind of like promising, the moon, and how could you possibly deliver that? You kind of can't. And so let's sort of talk about some of those things. We'll talk about the Rodecaster Duo first because that's the one that I haven't used yet. But I feel like I can speak on it because I've used the Rodecaster Pro 2 for a year now, and the Duo is essentially a smaller version of the Rodecaster Pro. The Duo, as you could expect, means it has 2 XLR inputs instead of 4, and it's significantly smaller, and it's also cheaper. It is $500, which if the big Rodecaster is $700, the Duo is $500. And then you get kind of in the world of like basic audio interfaces being around $200-ish. It's probably a little, I feel like the price is okay. If they could have made it $450, $399, I think would be a good price, but I genuinely feel like that's unrealistic. Obviously that would be a no-brainer, but I think it's fair for $500. And the thing that I'm excited about with the Duo, prior to having used it, but considering it's almost what Sony does, you're taking existing parts and putting them in a new package. I think that it is sort of like, it's like the opposite of the DLZ, where the DLZ is sort of this thing for like a very specific group of people. I feel like the Rodecaster Duo could set itself up to be like the thing for most people. And I think that's cool. I think most people probably don't need the Rodecaster Pro, but they want some of the basic functionality and operationality. And so they end up with a big Rodecaster, probably spending more money than they needed to have a bunch of features that they don't need or will never use. It's not even about being overkill. It's just like maybe it's not practical. Whereas the Duo has all of the functionality that they need, probably room to grow, but it's also like really, it's super small and compact and not going to take up as much space on your desk. And just, I think that the Duo, it would not surprise me, maybe by the end of this year or a year from now, if that's the most popular Rodecaster, because it really seems like the one that's so suitable for pretty much everybody, like the easy one to recommend. And if you wanted to go beyond that, then you get the Pro or whatever. So I'm excited to see that. Those are kind of my thoughts on that. I do think it's weird they got rid of the record button, the physical record button. You can only press record on the screen now, which isn't really a problem, except I've had people mention that they're like visually impaired, and so the lack of a physical button is tough. And I'm curious to know if at some point there might be an update that would let you map one of the smart pads to be a record button. So that way, if you want, you could still have a physical record button. Seems like that actually is kind of a really important thing. The next one, the Podmic USB, that's what I'm using right now. People are really excited for this one. I'm excited for this one. It looks super cool. It's all black, but it has like some gold accents and stuff on it. Otherwise, it's the same, the same Podmic style that's been around. The Podmic design has been one of my favorites forever. I love it. It's built super solid. It works really well. The only thing with the Podmic is I, over the years, became not super crazy about the sound of it, at least on my own voice and compared to other mics. It always sounds a little harsh and a little tinny. And when you go from not having a microphone to having a Podmic, it's such a world of difference and it sounds amazing. And there's certain voices that it works with very, very well. But then as time goes on, as time goes on, it also, I don't know, your ears just start to notice things. And it just, for me, the original Podmic became very fatiguing to listen to over a long period of time. So I'll be interested. We're already an hour into this. If you've been listening to this for an hour, I'm curious to know what that sounds like. And I have added some EQ on here. The Podmic has forced me to be less scared about EQing a mic, especially just sort of like taking down some of the high frequencies right away and getting rid of that to give it a more rich, full sound. The Podmic USB does have a slightly different sound than the original. It is slightly smoother. It is slightly richer. Not as much as I would like it to be. I would love for it to have more of the sound. I know this is a condenser, but I would love for it to have more of the sound of the NT USB Plus. I mean, the NT1 makes sense, but that's like its own thing with its own capsule. I feel like the NT USB Plus is such a good, it's such a good sounding mic on almost everybody. And I know it's condenser. This is a dynamic mic, but I was kind of hoping this would have more of that sound, and it still leans more towards the original pod mic. But again, very easy to EQ. So I would just say if you get a pod mic, any pod mic, be prepared to work on EQing it a bit and making sure you're running it through a mixer or some software that will let you do that. Obviously, the big news with this one is the USB functionality. I think they did an amazing job with that because it has physical controls. The NT1 USB, the NT1 5th generation, which has USB functionality. I made a video about this. My big complaint, though, is it has a USB plug and that's it. There's no headphone connector. There's no knobs. There's no LED light to let you know it's plugged in or anything. The pod mic has all of that. You have headphone outputs. You have LED lights. You have a mute switch. You have a volume dial. It has all of the functionality, at least the basic functionality that a USB mic should have. And of course, because it's USB and Rode has all their software, you can run it through all the software and have all the virtual modeling. So and this goes with any of their USB mics, even without having a Rodecaster, once it's connected to your computer through USB, you can open up like Rode Central or Rode Connect or whatever, and you essentially have a Rodecaster, a virtual one, right there to adjust and EQ everything, and it saves those settings to the mic itself. So if I were to use this mic with my computer, set the settings how I want it, and then via USB connect it to another computer, it's still going to sound that way, even if that computer doesn't have any of those software or anything on it. Like the mic will just sound how I said it, which is cool. That only affects USB. It does not affect XLR. That's totally separate. So that's cool. And it finally comes with a windscreen. The pod mic has always been a little bit susceptible to plosives, so you've always needed windscreens from it. Reporter Store finally does now make pod mic windscreens, so you can get colored foam windscreens for it. But now the pod mic USB just comes with a black kind of fitted, styled. It looks like a puffy. It looks like a pod mic having an allergic reaction, but I actually like it a lot, and it works really well, and it comes with the mic, and that's awesome. But my criticism of the Podmic USB is the price. It's $200. The original Podmic is $100. This should not be $200. This should be $150, and then it would be such a no-brainer. I don't know if this windscreen, maybe this is a $20 windscreen that's driving up the price, but double the price of the original. It's too much. That's too much. And when you look at what other microphones there are for $200, there's a lot. So you might still choose the Podmic USB because you like it for any number of reasons, it's not that it's not worth $200. It's $50 cheaper than the Shure MV7, which is an XLR USB combo mic. So it's not that that's totally. I guess if the original pod mic didn't exist, maybe I wouldn't think twice about the price. But to go, here's a pod mic, here's another version that's black with USB, and it's twice the price. I really feel like just because of that, this should be $150, maybe $170 if you want to go that route. But otherwise, I mean, it's been great so far. I'm trying to use it as much as I can, and I really like it. And it's got all the great, the great pod mic design and mounting options and all that stuff, which is cool. And that brings me to the last thing we're going to talk about, which is the Streamer X, the 4K capture card XLR audio interface, the first thing Rode has ever done that involves any kind of video. And I'll be honest, this section is going to be a little more abbreviated than I would normally like because for a number of reasons, my relationship with the Streamer X is a little bit complicated. But suffice it to say, it works really well, but it does not work as well as easily as Rode made it seem like it did. So it delivers on all the promises, but it's not as easy to make it deliver. It's not difficult, but it has been marketed as, this thing that you can get and it's plug and play. And then you're going to have this revolutionary experience of audio video capture. And it does do that. Like it's 4K capture. You have 4K 60 pass through. You have XLR audio. You've got you can have an XLR audio input. You can have a headset input. You can have a wireless. One of Rode's wireless transmitters can be paired to it. You can't use them all at the same time, but you can choose any one of those three ways to get audio into it. You've got 4 smart pads. You can connect it to all of the apps for all the processing. So you can run it through, Road Central and do all of like that virtual Rodecaster processing. They even put a really cool thing that is like presentation mode. So the smart pads then can control like a keynote or a PowerPoint or a Google Slides presentation. I love that. It's awesome. And it's cool to see where that might go with future firmware. It's also got a quarter 20 mount on the back. So it's really easy you don't have to just leave it sitting on your desk. It can mount all these different places. It is really cool and it works really well. And the image quality just straight away, especially coming from the A10 Mini, which is 1080, the 4K from the Streamer X looks so much better, but it even looks better than the 4K from the Elgato Cam Link. So the image quality is fantastic. The problem I had was when I got mine, the video was choppier and more stuttery than I expected it to be. And it turns out that you need to run 30 frames per second through the Streamer X, at least as it stands now. I don't know if that's something that will change. I do everything in 24. So even though my camera was set to 24 and my recording software was set to 24, essentially the Streamer X seems like it was just putting everything at 30, and that was causing some problems, which the quality I think would have been fine for streaming or for a video call, but it was definitely not going to like replace your camera's memory card, or it wouldn't have been good enough for like recording an actual video. And fortunately, once you change things to 30 and then go into OBS or Ecamm and tweak your settings a little bit, I have a whole video about how to do that and get some good quality. So it's pretty simple to do. And then it works really well. But I didn't know that. I was under the impression that it would take whatever resolution frame rate you wanted to throw at it up to 4K 30. And that is not the case. So you need to be a little more specific with your source and what is being sent into it. And then the other thing about it, which is, again, it's like, I really wish they would just be more clear in the documentation, is the cable that you need to use with it. So it comes with a USB-C cable, which is a very high-speed cable, but it just looks kind of like a normal USB-C cable. So what I did was I got it, opened it, saw the cable in the box, thought I have a million USB-C cables. I don't need another one. I'll just use the one that's already connected to my computer, connected it, and then I could only select the Streamer X as an audio source, but not a video source. And so I asked Rode what's up, and they said, be sure to use the cable that's in the box because it's a super high-speed cable. And then everything worked fine as soon as I did that, which is great. And so that's really like kind of like the frustration. Like the Streamer X works great and does everything that they said it could do and can do. And I love it. And it's been kind of nice to replace my A10 Mini because for the most part, I just used the single channel anyway. When I was teaching, I used the multiple channels a lot more on the A10, but since then I've kind of just been using one input most of the time. So I still have my A10 for those times when I need more than one camera. But for the rest of the time when I'm using one input, the Streamer X is great, and it can even be the audio source, and it doesn't even have to take up space on my desk because I can mount it everywhere. But it's really, the part that I'm annoyed by is that it's not clear that you need to use 4K 30, and it's not clear that you need to use this specific cable. And the reason that's annoying is because not only did it cause me issues, but I feel like a lot of people are going to have those same problems. I feel like when I get something like the Streamer X, I try to approach it like the average person would, which is probably not going to be spending your whole day digging through settings and figuring stuff out. But it's like, hey, I got this. I'm going to open it, plug it in, try to use it. Does it work that way or not? And this kind of does, but it's not as simple as Rode makes it seem like it is. And that is very frustrating. I really think that when you open the box, right on the lid of the box, not everybody's going to be as thorough in their documentation as Mackie is, where it's like, here's just, everything's broken down, easy to understand. But just, step 1, be sure to use this USB cable. Step 2, use a 30 frame per second source. Step 3, plug and play. Like, that's it. That would solve so many problems, because what I think is going to happen is a lot of people are going to end up getting the Streamer X, and they're going to end up with stuttery video, or they're going to use a cable that's not the proper cable, and they're not going to be able to select it, and they're going to think something is broken, or something's not working the way that it should, or something doesn't live up to the promises that it set, when it totally does. And why would you think, every cable looks the same? Why would you think I have to use this cable versus another? I am a bit frustrated after my experience with it, but that has more to do with my experience around it and less to do with the device itself. That is the wrapping up of this episode. So if you have thoughts, you can always send an email, as always, to tom@enthusiasmproject.com. You can just send me a message, like you can type it out. You can attach an audio or a video message if you want. And if you want the absolute easiest way to do that and to be included in the show, which is always fun, you can go to himynameistom.com and then scroll down till you find the link that says leave a message for the podcast. And you can just record right there You can use an interface. You got some cool connected that sounds amazing. You can use that, or you can literally use a built-in mic on whatever device you happen to be using, and it'll send it right to me, and I can share that in the next episode or a future episode if you want. So if you have any thoughts about any of the stuff or questions or whatever, feel free to do that. And I'd love to include that in a future episode. But otherwise, thanks so much for joining me to the beginning, the launch of season 10. And I appreciate it. I hope it'll be a fun season. Looking forward to it. And I hope you have a safe, happy, healthy, fun rest of your week. And I will see you next time.